All right. Well, I hope everybody did a good job setting up their null and alternate hypotheses. So for this section, this is talking about some of the possible errors that can occur when you're doing hypothesis testing. So if you do everything correctly and you set up everything correctly, you shouldn't ever see these type 1 and type 2 errors, but it is good to notice that there is a possibility that they could occur. So if you remember from last time, we were talking about that there were only two possibilities for a conclusion. So we were talking about we could either reject H naught or fail to reject H naught. And so it turns out there are two other ones, but again, if these occur, it really means that we've messed something up with the study rather than anything else. So if we look just to go through again, if H naught is true and we fail to reject H naught, then this is perfect. We have done the right thing. So that was kind of the fail to reject situation. The second one is the one that we're hopefully going to have occur. So if H naught is false and we reject H naught, then again, this is perfect. We've done everything correctly. All right, so here's where our different errors come in. So imagine, for example, that H naught is true, and all of a sudden we reject H naught. So H naught is true, but we think it's false. So if this occurs, this is what's called a type 1 error. So it's when we think H naught is false when it is actually true. And then the second one is if H naught is false and we fail to reject H naught, then this is what's called a type 2 error. So for this one, we are going to assume that that means that H naught's true, even though from what I told you in the previous section, that's not sort of the case, but it'll make more sense when we're talking about these different errors. So in this case, this is when we think H naught is true, but it is false in this case. So basically, we're making the wrong conclusion. We're getting the wrong conclusion instead of, as opposed to above where we're getting the right conclusion. So that's where these type 1 and type 2 errors come in. And so I've got a couple examples just so we can see what happens in these different cases. And they could be a little bit interesting. And these do come up sometimes in medical studies and stuff like that. And so I use these as some different examples. So let's look at example 1 so we can see how this would play out in a medical test analogy. So first situation is going to be considered a type 1 error, which is what's called a false positive. So in this case, if H naught is true, this means that we don't have the disease, whatever it happens to be. Like, maybe we tested, so in this case, H naught's true. This means that we do not have the disease. Since we rejected H naught, that means that we're telling the person that they have the disease. And this means that they're going to get a false positive. So really, they're going to get treated for a disease they don't actually have, which probably won't necessarily hurt them or anything like that, hopefully. But they're also wasting resources and things like that on a person who doesn't necessarily need the medication or anything. So as a type 2 situation, this would be what's called a false negative. So in this case, H naught is false, which means that we have the disease. But since we failed to reject H naught, this means that we're telling the person that they don't have the disease, that they're perfectly healthy. And so they're going to go home not getting any kind of treatment, and they're just going to get sicker and sicker and sicker in this process. So again, this one's kind of a worst case scenario because you're not actually getting treated for the disease, and it's just going to make things get worse and worse and worse for you. First one, again, not an ideal situation. You might be taking medicine you don't necessarily need, but it hopefully won't make you sick or anything like that. So, all right, so let's take a look at another one. So this is our different court convictions. So again, as a type 1 error, so in this case, we're convicting an innocent person. So since in this case H naught is true, that means that you're innocent. But since we reject H naught, that means they find you guilty even though you didn't actually do the crime. So now you're going to jail for a crime you didn't commit, which again, this is pretty much a terrible outcome. Or the type 2 situation, they let a guilty person go free. So in this case, H naught's false. That means you are guilty. But since we failed to reject H naught, that means they think that you're innocent. And so they let you go, and you can go on and keep committing crimes until they finally catch you for something else, hopefully, in that case. All right, so again, that's what we want to think about when we're thinking about these different hypothesis tests and how they may work and stuff. All right, so again, just to make sure we see what's going on. So type 1 error means incorrectly rejecting H naughts. This means H naught is true, and we think that H naught is false, so when it's actually true. So again, we think is false, even though H naught is true. And here we think H naught is true when H naught is actually false. All right, so if we look at some examples of how these would work out real quick. So suppose Frank tests rock climbing equipment and H naught is that his equipment is safe. So if this were a type 1 error, so H naught means is safe would be the true statement. So, but in this case, we think H naught is false. So we think is not safe. So since it's not safe, Frank probably won't go rock climbing. Which again, this is okay. I mean, it's a little disappointing that he doesn't get to go rock climbing, but at least he's not going to get hurt. And if he would have gone rock climbing, since it was safe, he would have been fine. But since he thought it was not safe, he decided to not go rock climbing. And so again, he's safe either way. So now as a type 2 error, this is a little bit worse of a situation because now there's something actually wrong with the equipment, but we think that the equipment is actually safe. So we think the equipment is safe when it's actually not. And so Frank goes rock climbing and may not survive, or definitely is probably going to get hurt. So Frank is probably going to get hurt. So again, this is kind of a terrible outcome. So the first one, again, it's kind of unfortunate, but he wouldn't get hurt or anything like that. In the type 2 error situation, this is definitely bad and something we wouldn't want to see occur in this case. All right, so let's take a look at another one here. So example 4, the victim of a car accident is brought to the emergency room, and H naught is that she is alive when she comes in. So in this case, H naught means that she's alive. So as a type 1 error, this would mean that they think that the person's dead. So in this case, they think so even though they're not. So they're not kind of performing any life-saving measures or anything like that because they think the person is dead. So they aren't trying to help the person. So this is kind of a terrible situation here. So because again, like without any kind of medical treatment, the person might actually end up dying, where in this case they actually were alive and they just didn't do anything about it to help them, which is kind of unfortunate. So for a type 2 error, so in this case, they think that the person, oh, hold on, let's see. So in this case, they think the person's alive when in reality they actually are dead. So this one, they think the person and they're doing all kinds of things to try to save this person when there's probably not going to have any luck reviving them or anything like that anyway. So again, this one's kind of a, I mean, it's worth it for them to try, but they probably aren't going to be successful at reviving the person if they already came into the hospital dead in this case. So, again, they're going to waste some resources and stuff like that trying, but at least they're given the chance a chance to live. Where the first case, they're just kind of wrote them off as being dead to begin with, even though they were alive. So, all right, so very good. So this is a little quick review of our couple different types of errors and how they work. So if you have any questions or anything about those, just let me know. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.